Welcome, everybody. We will be just taking a moment to let everyone in.
We've got quite a few participants today, so give us just a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Okay, I think everybody who was in the waiting room is in.
Terrific. Thank you, Allison. Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Kane, and I am the Superintendent of Douglas County Schools. I'd like to apologize in advance for my squeaky voice. I sound a little like a middle school boy because I am losing my voice, but I will do my best to make sure everyone can hear me. I really appreciate you joining me tonight. I appreciate you reading the communication that we put out, the letter that I wrote regarding how our district is funding. So the purpose of tonight is to talk a little bit about the state of our school district, how funding works, similar to what's in the letter, but I want to make sure that I'm as clear as possible and that I'm able to answer your questions. There will be some time for question and answer at the end. And when we get there, you can ask a question by using the Q&A or by raising your hand in Zoom. Allison and Ann, who are with me here tonight, will help me make sure that I get all of your questions answered. So with that, let's dive right in. First of all, I want to make sure that I talk about all the wonderful things that are happening in our school district. I am so very proud of our 89 schools, our fantastic staff, our wonderful families, and most importantly, our kids. We have always had and continue to have excellent schools and a culture of high expectations and academic success. I'm very proud to see that this year, 28 of our schools took home the John Irwin Schools of Excellence Award for being top in the state. 17 of our schools took home the Governor's Distinguished Improvement Award for highest growth in the state, which is really hard to do when you're already very high achieving. We have higher reading scores today than we did pre-pandemic, thanks to the amazing work of our teachers as they have adopted evidence-based reading programs across our district. And our class of 2023 earned $118 million in scholarships, and incidentally saved our families almost $40 million by coming out of high school with a college transcript with credits that would directly transfer towards a bachelor's or a master's or their higher education. In order to have a thriving community, we need to have thriving schools. We all know that the very first thing that businesses ask when they are looking to locate in Douglas County is how are the schools? When people consider moving to our community, they ask how are the schools? Our home values, our community, our economic engine, all depends on our schools. In Douglas County School District, we are very future focused. We are really looking at pathways for our kids. Not all of our students will go to college, and we want to make sure that we provide a pathway for them, no matter what their aspiration is, whether it's going to college or going directly into a career. We have a record number of partnerships this year with higher education institutions to help us with pathways and career and technical education. This year, we will be offering 52 programs, 22 industry certifications, so students can go directly into career or receive credit towards their college degree, and 14,000 seats in career and technical education in many fields. Some you see pictured here, many different fields. We're really working closely with our business community to make sure that we're providing the students for the future workforce here in Douglas County. But we have funding challenges. We have, and we're continuing to have funding challenges. And I know this sounds crazy to say in a time when all of our taxes are going up. I know my husband and I received the letter in the mail that said our home value was up 60%, which is outrageous. And that means our taxes are going up. It also means that we're paying more taxes into the school district. So I understand that it's difficult to see why we're having funding challenges when we will be collecting more taxes from our local taxpayers, and we will be. Our challenge is we will be getting less from the state. So let me talk a little bit about how funding works in the state of Colorado for schools. Schools are funded using local property taxes and state income taxes. It takes a combination of the two to fund our schools. The School Finance Act determines how much funding we're entitled to, and then consider that our buckets. This is how much funding the school district is entitled to. The bucket is first filled with whatever we raise locally. So whatever property taxes we raise locally through our regular mill is put into the bucket. And then the state fills in the difference to get to the top of the bucket. So even when our local property tax collections go up, the state share just shrinks, and it doesn't mean anything different for the school district. So consider this. I have 3 children, and when my 3 children were young, my husband and I gave them $10 a week in allowance. And usually I gave them whatever I had first. So maybe I would give each kid $3. Then my husband would give them each $7, so that they got $10. If I had more money in my wallet the next week and I gave them each $6, my husband just gives them each $4 and they still have $10. That's how the school district funding works. The more we get locally, the less we get from the state. There's no change in the school district's net funding. The only way our funding can change without the state lowering its portion is through a local mill levy override. So you can see on this graph, you can see Douglas County schools are funding compared to other districts. So on this graph, we have Boulder, Denver, Jeffco, Littleton, Cherry Creek, and Douglas County. The heavy black line indicates the funding per student that each of these districts is entitled to under the School Finance Act. And you can see from the blue and the green for each district that their local share and state share are a little bit different, but that dark black line is what they're entitled to under the School Finance Act. We are all allowed to ask our taxpayers to override the regular mills through a mill levy override so that we can collect more funding for our students and our schools. And we have all done that. That's the light gray bars. So you can see that while we have all asked our local taxpayers for more funding, Douglas County Schools has the least amount in that additional funding. So the difference in funding from the local mill levy override specifically between us and our neighbors is $2,000 a student. $2,000 a student. If you put that times our 63,000 students, that's $130 million a year. This is why we cannot pay our teachers anywhere near what Cherry Creek, Littleton, and our other neighbors are able to pay their teachers. This $2,000 per student difference in mill levy override funding is really, really making it challenging for us to pay competitively. If you look at the history of mill levy override funding, it's important to note that this has been kind of creeping up on us. It's been getting more and more challenging over time. These lines indicate mill levy override funding per student by year, by district. So you can see back in 2009, while we collected the least in mill levy override funding at that time, the gap wasn't that big. We have a much leaner administration than our neighbors. And so even with that gap back in 2009, we were able to keep up with pay more or less. As time carried on and other districts continued to increase their mill levy override funding, you can see we increased ours in 2018. But even with that, the gap has now become unsustainable. So it's now $2,000 per student gap, which means our average teacher salary is off by almost $20,000. So our teachers can go right across the border into a neighboring district for an average of $20,000 more per year. Put another way, our starting teacher salary here in Douglas County for a college degreed professional is $45,209. If you're watching this webinar, it's because you live here in Douglas County and you know that $45,209 is not a salary that makes it livable in Douglas County. Our neighboring districts, their starting salaries vary from just over 50,000 to 60,000 and higher. So 45,209 is very, very challenging for us. It's really hard when we have teachers retire. It's hard for us to get new teachers in to replace them. And even as I sit here today, we have unfilled openings where we don't have any applicants because we are the lowest paying. We also have growing communities that do not have schools. Our district is enormous. Our district is about 2/3 the size of Rhode Island. So we have enormous landmass and we have pockets, we have communities everywhere. This map is just one illustration of those communities. Circled is Highlands Ranch. In Highlands Ranch, we have 18 elementary schools. On the left is Sterling Ranch. Sterling Ranch is going to be about half the size of Highlands Ranch. We have 0 elementary schools to serve kids in Highlands Ranch. They are a school desert. Likewise with the canyons and other areas that are geographically separate from what was new 15, 20 years ago and really are school deserts. And just like we needed to provide schools when families moved into Highlands Ranch 20 and 30 years ago, we need to be able to provide schools for families moving into these newer communities that are set apart and just as large. And we're navigating a changing landscape. As we talked about earlier on, our property assessments are way up. This means that all of us are paying more taxes. We do not take that lightly. My family does not take that lightly. We also have Proposition HH potentially on the ballot in November. And we know that Proposition HH will have an impact. Proposition HH reduces assessment rates to 6.7%. But in return, the Tabor refunds that we would normally get would be reduced. So you're getting a break on your property taxes, but potentially losing Tabor refund depending on your income level. The constitutionality is currently being challenged in the Colorado Supreme Court. We also have looked at voter sentiment. So we've done polling in our district. We've actually done polling for the first about in late April, and we did polling again in late June because we wanted to see where taxpayers were at. There is support for Douglas County's initiatives, but it is very, 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 very tight. So given all of that, staff was asked to make a recommendation to our Board of Education on June 20th as far as funding goes. And I want to share this recommendation with all of you and talk about why this is the recommendation that we chose to make. The number one reason that we made this recommendation are actually pictured here on our slides. Like many of you, my children have gone through Douglas County system. My children grew up here. We've lived here for 23 years. They have had the benefit of our amazing school system and are now in college, and one is actually post-college. And they have benefited so greatly from this system. I want to make sure that the babies that are pictured here will have the same amazing opportunities that my kids had. My kids had amazing opportunities because of the amazing educators that they had throughout their career in Douglas County schools. And keeping those educators is the key to making sure that we have a promising and bright future for these kids. So this is the recommendation that our staff has made to our Board of Education. They have not made a decision on this yet. So while I am sharing with you today, I'm informing you of our recommendation and letting you know what our justification is for making that recommendation. We've recommended a mill levy override in the amount of $66 million, $60 million of which would be used to pay staff, teachers and staff more competitively. We are not just dying in the area of teachers, we are dying everywhere. I'm having hard conversations with my transportation department right now because I am down 100 bus drivers. We are the lowest paying, and we have done everything we can to increase bus driver pay, but we do not have applicants, and we have 100 bus driver openings, and that means hard conversations with our transportation department and with our families. We are down in our kitchen staff. We're down in our security support, our campus security folks, our education assistants who take care of our kids with special needs. Leadership too. Assistant principals, I have a terrible time getting assistant principals because they can make $30,000 more somewhere else. All the way through, we are really struggling with competitive pay. So the MLO is a $60 million for competitive pay and $6 million to increase school resource officer and other campus security personnel at our schools. The bond recommendation is $484 million, and I'm going to talk about in detail where that number comes from. We need to continue to provide safe and adequate learning spaces, prevent overcrowding, deal with brand new communities that are school deserts, and make sure that we're continuing to look at safety and security and career and technical education. So I'm going to go through those and talk about what's included in those numbers. So let's start with the $60 million in compensation. So this is very specifically what this means. Every staff member in Douglas County Schools knows what this potential mill levy override would mean for their pay. So there's no mystery. There's no, I wonder how the board will allocate it after the fact. We are actually, we presented to the board a plan, and they're asking for their approval of that plan. So should they approve that plan, it will be automatically triggered in the event of a successful election. District teachers would receive an average of a 9.2% increase. I shared earlier that our funding gap is $130 million. So $60 million gets us halfway through that funding gap. We do have a leaner, leaner administration, so that helps. But we will not be all the way to where Cherry Creek and Littleton are, but we'll at least be within striking distance where we can be a little bit more competitive. 9.2% average increase for teachers also means that our starting salary would eke up just over $50,000. So we're still at the bottom, but we're not way down here. Our district support staff, bus drivers, EAs, custodians, all of those folks would receive a 9% increase. All other district staff would receive a 7% increase. I want to make sure to point out that if you have kids that attend a charter schools do receive a proportionate share of any potential mill levy override, and they will also be using that to pay more competitively. Their specifics, though, depend on the charter school. In the area of safety and security, in the MLO, that's $6 million. Additionally, $15 million of the potential bond are set aside for safety and security. This would buy an additional school resource officer support. We are so blessed to have, we have a great partnership with local law enforcement. We have school resource officers in all of our middle schools, all of our high schools, and they patrol our elementary schools. We still have gaps that we would like to fill. And adding additional school resource officers in all of our jurisdictions would help us fill those gaps. We also have campus security specialists, and we would like to have a campus security specialist in each of our elementary schools. This would also include upgrading equipment, making sure that we're continuing to replace equipment as it becomes outdated, to make sure that everything ties into our common system, and building upgrades. We haven't built a new school since 2010, so all of our schools are aging. And so to continue to make sure that we're keeping our safety and security equipment, radios, all of those things as up to date as possible is very important. Career and technical education investment would be $26 million. We very much need an automotive solution in the Highlands Ranch area. We have an automotive solution in Parker and Castle Rock where our students can be part of an auto shop. We want to make sure we add that so that our Highlands Ranch students, also our students on the west side of our district, also have those opportunities. The Legacy campus, which is our innovation campus that we got for a screaming deal, thanks to a partnership with the Linningers. We have remodeled that so that we are able to offer amazing career and technical education opportunities for our students, including aviation, culinary, buildings and controls, architectural engineering, a new teacher academy, a whole number of options for our kids. We want to take full advantage of the square footage in that building and do a phase 2 to offer more career and technical education opportunities to our 63,000 students throughout Douglas County. The capital renewal and replacement. This is very boring, but it absolutely is very necessary. Our buildings are very much aging. Everything is aging. Our school buses are aging, our buildings are aging, and we need to be able to keep up with that maintenance, including things like roofs and all of those the roofs, the heating and the cooling, all of the things that are needed to make sure that our buildings continue to operate, boilers, chillers, all of those things. That includes our charter schools as well as our district-run schools. we would upgrade to LED district-wide, which will ultimately save our taxpayers money and energy bills. And we need to make some ADA related improvements and school bus replacements, et cetera. Neighborhood school construction. So in order to address the school deserts, we need to be able to build some new elementary schools. And those would be in the Canyons, Sterling Ranch, and Crystal Valley. We know Ridgegate is in desperate need of an elementary school as well. But that one is in hopefully in a future phase. We just can't do that many all at once. And then making sure that we're expanding our middle schools in a middle school in Parker and a middle school in Castle Rock, because that is less expensive for our taxpayers than building another elementary school. I know, like you guys, I leave my house every day and I feel like 200 homes have gone up since tomorrow. I drive the Crowfoot Valley corridor and I can't even believe how many houses have gone up in the last few years. Those houses have children, those children need schools. In the area of special education, we would invest $17 million for our students with special needs. And that includes we have a facility in Parker off of Dransfeld that is currently something like a mobile building. It's basically a temporary building on land, and that we need to make sure that we upgrade that to a very solid building for our students with special needs, as well as making sure that our programming is inclusive across our district, whether it's career and technical education, busing, et cetera. Athletics and activities would be an $8 million investment. Many of our theaters have broken curtains, broken seats, outdated sound systems, and big sound challenges. Our students are inspired, whatever their extra school activity is, that activity often inspires our kids academically as well, whether they're performing arts students, passionate about athletics, or whatever it might be. We want to make sure we continue to provide opportunities for those kids so that we can continue to have band and orchestra and performing arts for our students. And then finally, a staff and student device refresh on the technology side. So that's really laying out what our bond and mill levy override recommendation included, and why those things are needed in our district for our students. And I always go back to these kids because making sure that I feel like our job as a community and my job as your superintendent is to ensure that these kids have the brightest futures that they possibly can. Kids in our system today are going to have very bright futures, and we want to make sure that we're able to continue that great work so that our community can thrive, so that all of you can have schools and teachers and staff that you are incredibly proud of. And that concludes my presentation, but I want to make sure to address your questions. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and ask Allison and Ann to jump in and let me know what questions people have.
Hi, yes, we have a lot of questions. So we are going to do our best and kind of combine some. So if you don't hear your exact question, hopefully we will get something close. We do have several people asking about why only ask for this amount of MLO if it doesn't get us all the way to competitive.
That's a really great question, and I'm glad people asked. And I thought I had a slide in there about the impact to taxpayers, so I want to apologize for that. So first, let me say the combined impact of the bond and mill levy override to homeowners, including my family, would be $20 a year per 100,000 in home value. So if you're in a $500,000 house, that would be $20. That would be $100 a year. If you're in $1 million house, it's $200 a year. That's the impact. So to answer your question, why didn't we ask for a mill levy override that was twice as much? We really want to balance making sure that we're making a reasonable ask. So if we want to make sure we're making a reasonable ask of our taxpayers, and there will be a time in the future when we may
they're working on it.
When we may ask for another mill levy override. But this is what we're asking for right now, 60 million. Asking for 130 million is a really big ask for our taxpayers, and I think it's probably more than people could handle.
Thank you, and sorry, I thought I was muted. Also, we've put a link in the chat for everyone because we are getting a lot of questions about lunch, free lunch for kids, and we have put a link to our nutrition services. But can you talk, I'm going to combine a few questions, some of the strategies that we're doing to keep staff, retain staff, and there was a mention of free lunch for staff members. So I'm going to link those two and have you talk a little bit about that and other things we're doing to retain and attract teachers.
Great. All right. First of all, let me start with students. We will be offering free lunch for all of our students starting next year. That was a state law that was passed in November of 22, I believe. So that state law was passed in November of 22. It is paid for through a separate fund. So the state reimburses us for those lunches from a completely separate place, not out of our School Finance Act funding that I showed you on the bar chart. So that comes from state funds and the district is reimbursed for free lunches. Because we're struggling so much to pay competitively and because our ballot initiative for a mill levy override last year came in at 49.33%, the Board of Education asked us to make sure that we go out and come up with every creative retention strategy that we possibly can, because we've got to hold on to our teachers for as long as we can, and we're asking them to hang with us while we work with our taxpayers. So we came up with some really creative ways to retain staff. And I'd love to share a number of those ways with you. One is free lunch. While we had to build in the infrastructure to do school lunches for all of our kids, again, the kids' lunches are reimbursed by the state. We are going to offer our staff free lunches. So if we have a bus driver or a grounds worker with a badge, they can stop by one of our schools and check in and get a free lunch, as well as our teachers, our education assistants, etc. And we're working in the infrastructure to make sure that we're able to do that. It's a small benefit, but it's a big one. I have a child, I have a daughter, a grown-up daughter, who is working in our schools, and she's an education assistant. She was working at Walmart on the weekends because she can't make enough money as an education assistant. And she's so careful about what she packs for lunch every day. And it's a crisis if she leaves it at home because she doesn't have time to leave. And she doesn't feel like she has the funding to be able to go out and buy a big lunch. So this is a huge benefit for our staff that will also make their days easier, I hope. So free lunch, we're offering them reduced tuition on our before and after school program. Our teachers are just like us, right? They're raising kids. They're trying to put kids through college. They're trying to sort out daycare. They have all of the same issues that all of us have and all of us have had as our children have been growing up. We've kept our benefits costs flat for the next school year so that our staff weren't seeing a significant increase in benefits. And we've offered them a $2,000 retention stipend, whether they're a teacher or a custodian. They get a $2,000 retention stipend in September if they worked with us last year and they're staying with us this year. The way we were able to pay for a lot of these retention strategies is through vacancy savings. Last year, we weren't able to fill all of our positions due to this staffing crisis. And so we took that savings of positions that weren't filled and are investing those dollars into temporary retention strategies for our staff. That's not a long-term solution, but we're doing everything we can to hold on to our staff for as long as we can and to honor the great work that they do for our kids every single day.
Okay, next question here. We've had several people ask if splitting the district into smaller districts would make more sense financially. And with the district being so large with varying needs in the different areas.
Actually, that question comes up a lot. Splitting the district into smaller districts would take an act of Congress. But that being said, I don't believe it would be more efficient financially. Colorado Springs is split into many, many small districts, and there's actually been a big movement in Colorado Springs to try to consolidate because they have all these little districts. So they're paying a superintendent for every district. They're paying a transportation department for every district. At the size that we are able to be incredibly efficient, especially in terms of the services that we provide centrally for our schools and for our staff. So I don't believe it would be more efficient financially to divide into smaller districts. We do recognize that our communities vary greatly because, again, 2/3 the size of Rhode Island. So the needs of our families that send their kids to Cherry Valley, which is a little elementary school, a little rural elementary school that is in the southeast part of our district, their needs and wants are very different than a community in Highlands Ranch or one of our brand new communities. So we recognize that, and we work really hard to make sure that our schools have the ability to truly respond to the needs of their own communities.
Thank you. We're still getting some questions about how the reassessment and the increase in property taxes, and why does that not go directly to our schools?
Sure. Yeah. So I want to be clear. It does go to our schools. When we are paying higher property taxes towards schools, that money the school district will be collecting more dollars from local taxpayers. Local taxes do not fund education entirely. Education is funded by a combination of local and state. So when we collect more from our local taxpayers, the state contributes less. So it's like that funding analogy with an allowance. Our 3 kids had a $10 allowance growing up. I would give them what was in my wallet, and then my husband would fill in the difference. So if I give my kids $3 each, he would give them $7. They have $10. If the next week I double how much I give the kids $6 each. Now it's double out of my wallet. My husband just gives them $4. They still have $10. We're the kids. Douglas County School District is the kids. We still have $10, whether the local taxpayers give us 3 of it or 6 of it. The state just figures out what that difference is and gives us the difference. We still have $10. I hope that helps.
Thank you. I'm still going through these questions. I think we should talk a little bit about declining enrollment, increasing enrollment because of the areas we're talking about, how we're going to address that, and how those overall enrollment numbers affect the money that we get from the state. That was a lot.
Sure. Of course, we're funded based on the number of students that attend our district. And more or less, our individual schools are funded by the district based on the number of students that attend those schools based on what students are attending those schools. Because we have such a large community, we do have growing areas, which I've already addressed, that are school deserts. I moved here 23 years ago. My husband and I moved into the Castle Pines North area when it was massively growing. And it was, we had 1 baby, that was it. Later we had 3 kids. I fully expected that my children would have a school to go to. I did not expect that my children would be put into a bus and bused from Castle Pines to Highlands Ranch in order to go to school. I fully expected schools to be put in in Castle Pines, and they were. And the way that that happens is through a bond election. So there was a bond election, back in the early 2000s or whatever, that paid for the schools that were built in my community. Now we have families like mine moving into Sterling Ranch, which is significantly east of Highlands Ranch. And they too expect, reasonably so, that their children will be able to go to a school in Sterling Ranch versus being bused to another community. So that's the growing side. And in Highlands Ranch in particular, because so many of us moved here 20 and 30 years ago and brought all of our little kids, we love this community and we all stayed. So our kids have now grown up like mine. Many of our families in Highlands Ranch are sending their kids to college, or their kids are even past college. And they're not leaving their homes. They're still in their homes. So new families with little kids aren't moving into those homes. So schools that had 600-700 kids 15 years ago today have 300 kids attending schools. So we are also working with our Highlands Ranch community on what we're going to have to make sure that we do to adjust to the changing demographics of that community. And that's a discussion that we have had with Highlands Ranch, are having with Highlands Ranch, and will continue to have regardless of whether a bond passes or not, we have to make sure that we adjust for the changing demographics of our community. So I hope that helped.
Thank you. We are getting questions. I'm going to combine this as well. So one, do all of the board members support funding? So maybe we can talk about that, talk about August 8th, and then plans for if they should choose not to vote for it, and or should it not pass in November?
Okay, so let me take those one at a time. When we put the mill levy override on the ballot in November of 22, that was a 7-0 vote. So, and all of our board members, as in their role as citizens, were out promoting the bond mill levy override in every spare second of their time. While our board members do not agree on everything, they actually, in my observation, really do agree on most things that are best for our kids and best for our district. Funding is something that all 7 of our board members are every bit as well versed in as I am, and are every bit as concerned as I am, and are very, very supportive, have been very supportive of efforts to try to resolve our funding. That being said, the board has not voted yet for the ballot in November 23. That vote would happen on August 8th. And so anyone is welcome to watch the August 8th board meeting. But I have not yet seen a single board member who is not every bit as concerned about this issue as I am, and who has not been supportive.
Thank you.
I missed the second 2 parts. Sorry, Allison.
Yeah, what's the plan? What's
the other one
should we
was-
not?
Yeah. So the question was, if they don't vote to support it, what's the plan? And if they do vote to support it and it doesn't pass, what's the plan? I believe those were the 2 questions. The first, if they don't take staff's recommendation to put a potential bond mill levy override on the ballot, that would mean that we would be delaying our efforts, I assume, to some future election. Now, that's really, really challenging. This year is really challenging. Last year was really challenging, but next year is going to be really, really challenging because of the presidential election and all of the politics that surround a presidential election. So it would probably be the best time to have this kind of measure on the ballot statistically is an even year that is not a presidential election. So the next opportunity for that is 2026. And that's a really long time for us to try to figure out how to operate with not enough teachers in front of our kids. But that would be a huge challenge. It's one we would take on, but it'd be a very huge challenge. Really, when you're looking at a fixed income, your choice is if you want to pay people more and you don't have additional funding, but you need to pay people more, the only way you can do that is to have fewer people. I often get questions about how efficient we are and our administration. And I've provided some numbers in my letter as well as on the website around our administration, but I just want to give you an example. According to the Colorado Department of Education statistics, and the CDE keeps numbers on everything, Douglas County School District spends about $53 a student on general administration. Our neighbors are 2 and 3 times that number. That is not a critique on our neighbors, but we are running an extremely lean operation. And I just want to give you an example. We have 8,600 employees. Most of them, of course, are at our schools. I have 23 human resources professionals to manage the needs of 8,600 employees. According to Forbes magazine, the industry ratio for HR professionals to employees should be 1 to 50. 23 for 8,600 employees is 1 to 370. Our neighbors are somewhere around 1 to 100, and we're at 1 to 370. That means when a teacher calls and they need something, there's no one to answer the phone. 23 people to manage the needs of 8,600 is about as lean as we can possibly get. Also makes it really challenging to recruit, which is again a big part of the issue. And that's true throughout our schools and our central. We keep things as lean as we possibly can. When I served as interim superintendent from 2016 to 2018, I cut $24 million in central admin spending ongoing. Those cuts are still in place. And so, you know, we really are as lean as we can possibly be. So, so that's the piece there. So it's not like, oh, we'll just cut a bunch of administrators and suddenly we'll be able to pay more competitively. If we have to cut the number of staff, it would have to be in our schools, which is really, really hard.
Okay. We have a question about the pursuit of state and federal grants to help contribute and subsidize to new school construction. For example, DOLA, which I believe is the Department of Local Affairs.
Okay, so sure, I can answer that question. Let me just give you an overview really quickly about how school finance funding works in the state of Colorado. So under state law, when developers build new communities, they are obligated to dedicate land for public schools and public parks. That's how it works in Colorado, works differently in other states. That's how it works here. So the developer's contribution is the land. It is up to the local community to build the school. The same way it is up to us to build our own libraries. If we want libraries in Douglas County, we, the taxpayers of Douglas County, pay for and build a library in Douglas County. There are some funds at the state level for school facilities. One is the Building Excellent Schools Today program, or the BEST program, which is in part funded by the marijuana money that you may have heard of. The Building Excellent Schools Today program is really focused on really, really rural communities that have no chance of being able to build a school building for their 100 kids from the local taxpayers, because there just aren't enough taxpayers to pay that much money. It is not focused on communities like ours. It truly is our responsibility. I know we'd love for it to be someone else's responsibility, but it's not. It's truly our responsibility as a community to build schools, just like it's our responsibility to build libraries and any other public use good that makes our community better and makes our community thrive. Schools are no different than libraries. It's our responsibility. I hope that helps. Actually, the last thing I would say is my school, the schools that were in my children's neighborhood, those weren't built by my children's neighborhood. Those were built by the residents in Highlands Ranch. And the schools that are in Highlands Ranch, those were built by residents in Castle Rock. As one community, we work together to build things like schools and libraries that make our community better and brighter for all of our citizens.
Great. Can you talk about how taxpayers can be assured what the money will be used for, what it will not be used for, and how we are using the language in those issues to do that?
Absolutely. So we have a bond and mill levy override plan that we will be asking the Board of Education to approve. That plan is very specific, more specific than the slides that I just shared with you. So that plan goes through every dollar and how it's spent, including the nature of the raises and including by school, what improvements will be made by school. So that plan is where you would look to see what those improvements are. Should the Board of Education approve that plan, then if an election is, in the event an election is successful, then that plan would be executed on. So there's no going back to the board and saying, gosh, we just won this election, what should we do with all the money? That's not that isn't how it would work. It would really go through our plan. And I'm actually bringing that plan up right now to just share my screen and show our taxpayers what that actually looks like. So it's loading. Here we go. Hopefully, Allison, can you give me a thumbs up if people can see this? Terrific. So this is, oops, actually I grabbed the wrong thing. Hang on. I want the actual plan. Here we go. Okay, so this plan is published on our website, and this is a draft because this is what was presented to the board on June 20th as part of the staff recommendation. So it goes through the information that I just went through, and then starting on page 10, it goes through how the money would be spent including the specific compensation changes. So you can see that here. And on the bond, you can see all the dollars being broken out. And there is an appendix in this plan. These are the new salary schedules that would be applied. So again, every staff member will know to the dollar what their compensation change would be, because the last thing I want to have is expectations that then we don't meet. So we are being as transparent and upfront as we possibly can, to the point where our teachers can actually look up their new salary to the dollar. And then we have listed by building. Every single school is on this list in the appendix, starting on page 20, and goes through every school that shows exactly what improvements would be made. So you can see Acres Green, for example, what would be changed. A boiler RTU's Acres Green is one of our older schools. So it gives you a good idea of what that would look like. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. And we do have the link to our funding page in the chat. You can also just go to our website and look at funding needs. There's a big button on the top, future funding needs, and all of this information is on that page, including what Superintendent Kane just showed. Okay, can you talk about marijuana money?
Sure. Yes. So when we passed the laws pertaining to marijuana money some time ago, I know there were lots of promises like it'll go to education. There's gonna be so much money and it's all going to go to education. A lot of the marijuana money goes to the Building Excellent Schools Today program, which I've already talked about. That's the best program that funds school facilities that are not in Douglas County, school facilities in very, very rural and very impoverished areas. Some of the marijuana money does go into the state general education fund, which is part of the fund that equalizes our funding. So going back to our funding, we get, let's say we get $6 from property taxes, then we get the other $4 from the state education fund. The marijuana money just is part of that state education fund, but there was no specific windfall for school districts from the marijuana money. And I think we actually have that as an FAQ on our website because we get asked that a lot.
I believe we do too. Sorry, I just got sidetracked here. What's being done to grow our own teachers? Do we offer college scholarships or in exchange for an agreement to come back and work? As an example.
Like an indenture. No, I'm just kidding. No, we do. That's something I'm very passionate about, is making sure that we're growing our own teachers as much as we possibly can. In addition to our challenges with paying competitively, there is a nationwide teacher shortage. I want nothing to do with being a victim of a nationwide teaching shortage. I want to do everything that within our power to take that into our own hands. So we've done two things. One, we've created an alternative licensure program here in Douglas County School Districts. It's starting in the fall. And that alternative licensure program means that someone, a college degreed professional in my schools, will have a path to becoming a licensed teacher in the state of Colorado without paying $6,000 in tuition to a university to do that alternative licensure path. We will be providing that pathway to them. It's a win-win because we need them to teach in our schools, and we know our people best. So our principals know who they would recommend to put in that program to become a teacher in our schools. We have just recently gotten that program accredited by the Colorado Department of Education, which means that the teachers will be able to get that same teaching license that they would if they were to pay the University of Colorado at Denver or Metro or wherever. We're actually doing it here in-house. So that's number one. Number two, part of our Legacy Campus Career and Technical Education programming includes a new teacher academy. So what that looks like is these are our kids that want to become teachers, and they will be able to earn credits, college credits, while in high school towards a teaching degree. So the hope is that when they graduate from high school, they will have an entire year already out of the way and therefore paid for, that they don't have to pay for when going into a teacher program. They will have a program to be able to go into, and we will offer them student teaching right here in Douglas County. So those are two ways that we really are working on growing our own. What we can't fix is the starting salary that we'll be able to offer those kids. But at least getting those kids interested. I know, like many of you, I raised my children here, and it is, of course, my sincere hope as a mom that my children choose to build their lives here. And so many of our kids do choose to build our lives here, and we want to make sure we take advantage of that and of all of our kids that really want to be teachers when they grow up.
Thank you. Can you cover a little bit again about what the developers and home builders and the fees that they collect and why those don't cover the cost of building schools?
Sure. So again, under the law, developers are obligated to dedicate land. They do also pay an impact fee. So developers do pay an impact fee. Not all of them. It's very complicated. It depends on the jurisdiction. So if they're in Douglas County, they do. If they're in a different one of our smaller jurisdictions, they may not. But many of them pay an impact fee per home that goes into a fund that we manage. That's a fund for capital needs. Building a new elementary school at today's prices with inflation is a $50 to $60 million prospect. In a single community with impact fees, maybe it's $100,000. So it's what we use those impact fees for are improvements in that community pertaining to school. So let me give you an example. If we have a school in a neighborhood and the impact fees that were collected from that developer, we need a crosswalk to make getting to school safer, or we need a crossing zone. We would take the money from that account and put it into a crossing zone. It can help us build a crossing zone. It cannot help us build a school because it's just the scale is completely off. I hope that helps.
Thank you for that. Let me grab a couple of others.
I see that someone's asking about the salary schedules.
Yeah.
Those are published on our website. The draft potential post MLO bond salary schedules are published. And so if you go to DCSD K-12 and click on my future funding needs, those draft schedules should be up there on that page. If they're not, please let us know.
Yeah. I find a lot of people, and I hear this a lot when I'm out talking too, and people start thinking about paying more taxes, and we lose sight of the fact about the differential. If we could just talk about that again, that paying additional taxes, that property taxes going up, et cetera, anything that happens at the state level, how that doesn't solve the issue, the problem.
Yeah. So there are plenty of people at the state looking at the School Finance Act and looking at how schools are funded in the state of Colorado. We are one of I think we're ranked 40th out of 50 states in terms of school funding under our School Finance Act. So that's something that lawmakers are constantly looking at. But that our challenge is the difference. Our challenge is the local mill levy override difference. And I'd love to share my screen one more time and just put this slide back up in front of everyone, if I can get to it, if I can actually see it. Oh, I lost it. Hang on just a second. Okay, so if I can just show you this slide one more time, and I'll actually leave it up so that you can actually process it. The black box around each district, that's what we're entitled to under the state. If the state were to increase education funding in the state of Colorado, all of those black boxes would move up. The black boxes are not our challenge. There are differences. You can see there are some differences in where the black boxes land. Denver gets more per student than the rest of us due to their high at-risk population. But in general, we're all pretty similar. It is the light gray bars where our big problem is. So even if the state increases funding for everyone, that would be fantastic. But I'm still going to be $20,000 off of Cherry Creek and Littleton's average teacher salary without a mill levy override change. For those of you who don't know anything about my background, my degrees are actually in applied mathematics and computer science, my bachelor's, and I spent a decade as a data scientist before shifting into education. For me, this is just math and markets. As long as there is a $2,000 differential in local mill levy override between us and our neighbors, we are going to be off on our average teacher salary by about $20,000 a year. And so that's where where our issue lies in terms of paying more competitively. I would love it if we could all pay teachers more, but everybody would pay teachers more and we'd still be $20,000 off. And I still have teachers trying to put kids in college. And, you know, any of us can put ourselves in the shoes of a teacher. Somebody came along tomorrow to your job and told you that you had an opportunity to make $20,000 a year more to work right on the other side of County Line Road. And you're raising a family and you're putting kids through college. How do you say no to that? Even if you love where you work, even if you love your job and you love your community, we're all trying to take care of our families.
Thank you. We just had a great response, I think, because we threw this page back up. Why on earth is Boulder so much? So maybe we talk a little bit about why Boulder and Denver in particular contribute so much more than we do to our total funding.
All right, so I believe that question is around the blue and the green. Yes. And again, the blue is the local taxpayer share, and the green is where the state fills in the difference to get to the top of the heavy black line. This is all normalized per student, so that's important to point out. Boulder and Denver have far more commercial property than we do here in Douglas County. And I think that makes a big difference as far as their local taxpayers contributing more. There's just more of a local tax base to draw from. And that's why they're able to collect more. This is one of the reasons the school finance app looks the way that it does with this differential piece, is that each community's ability to collect property taxes is not only dependent on how many homeowners they have, but it's also dependent on property values in that particular community, commercial property values in that particular community. So it's a little bit why it looks the way that it does. But I have heard people say, well, this just means that we're giving money to Boulder and Denver. We're not. Arguably, it's the other way around. We do receive more from the state, our state share, than most of the other districts do. And so I hope that's helpful.
Thank you for doing that. I wish we had more time. We only have a couple more minutes. There are so many great questions. I did put in the chat that please watch the funding page. There is an FAQ section. We will try to get as many of these. If they're not on there, we'll try to get some more on there and address these questions. And you can always reach out to us to ask questions and we'll try to get to you. Also watch for future town halls. Superintendent Kane does a number of these last year, and we'll continue to do those. Real quickly, can you address, and literally we have a minute, update on DCSD building the staff apartments that was discussed in a board meeting?
So we have discussed some creative options with our dedicated land to look at if we can work with a developer to build housing that could be for teachers. So we're continuing to look at and research that. There may be some tweaks that would need to be made to state law to make it possible to prioritize teachers and district staff, but that is certainly one of the creative solutions that we are trying to look at. It won't solve the issue. Even at that, even when you look at the apartments in our community that are attainable housing, not affordable housing, but attainable housing, even those, the lowest rent is about $1,200 a month for a one bedroom, $1,200 to $1,400 a month for a one bedroom. Even that is really hard for someone who's making $45,209 to be able to afford. I really want to thank everyone for being engaged in this conversation, for taking the time to read the letter that I mailed home or sent home. Thank you for looking at it. Thank you for asking all your great questions. I know I'm playing with fire, but I'm going to give you all my email. It's aaron.kane@dcsdk12.org. And I'm sure Ann or Allison can put that in the chat. Please be patient with my response time, but I will respond to you. If you have an additional question that you did not get answered, I will respond to you. So these are your schools. You are our taxpayers. You are our citizens. I have the great privilege of running the school system as the chief executive, these are your schools and you fund them, and you absolutely have a right to ask questions, and I will do everything that I can to answer those questions. Thank you so much again for attending, for talking about these challenging topics with us, for listening, and just for being engaged in our school system. This is our community school system, and it means everything that all of us are working together to make sure that our kids and our entire community have the brightest future that we possibly can. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you and talking to you individually. So thanks so much.
Thank you.